station. This is the European Space Agency. How do you hear me?
European Space Agency, this is the International Space Station. I hear you loud and clear.
Well, hello, Tim. Good afternoon. You are now connected with the UK, Poland, and Norway. If you'd like to say hello to them, then we'll open the floor to questions.
Well, to everybody in the UK, Poland, and Norway, it's a huge pleasure and a privilege to be speaking to you this afternoon from the International Space Station.
And we're now going to the York, UK, for their first two questions.
Hello, Tim. Tom Holloway, Hillcroft Primary School. Which skills or experiences have unexpectedly proven most useful to you in space?
Hello, Tom. That's a good question, and one that's hard to answer because there's not much in the space business that is unexpected, and I guess that's a good thing. I suppose you could say that the ability to put together an IKEA wardrobe is probably one of the unexpected skills. And what I mean by that is just the ability really to be able to operate with tools and equipment to read procedures efficiently and effectively. That's our day-to-day operation, and it's something that we have to be good at. But our training is so comprehensive, and we spend so long. We've got such a good ground team, thousands of people who prepare us for this mission, that in all reality, there's not much that's unexpected when we get to space.
Hi, Tim. Karen Hammond, head teacher, Mellor Community Primary School in Leicester. What training have you received to support the development of your creative thinking and problem-solving skills?
Hi, Karen. That's an interesting question, and I think really in terms of creative thinking and problem solving, that's something that we develop throughout our entire lives, and certainly for the early part of my career as a military officer and 18 years as a military pilot, and subsequently as a test pilot as well. We're constantly being taught how to be critical of our surroundings and the things that we're working with, and how to improve on things, and that certainly helps with the creative thinking and problem solving. In terms of the training I've received from the Space Agency, two elements stand out in particular, and that's the European Space Agency's caves training, where we live for 7 days and nights in a cave in Sardinia with 5 or 6 fellow astronauts and cosmonauts, and we are put under pressure. We're trying to do tasks that are similar to the tasks will be expected of us in space, and it's a wonderful environment to do all of the kind of psychological profiling, and also to try and involve those creative thinking, those problem-solving type skills. And the second training event, which was excellent for that as well, which is NASA's NEMO event, where I spent 12 days underwater off the coast of Florida. And again, we were using that as a space analog for problem solving.
Thank you, Tim. We're now going to Warsaw, Poland for their two questions.
Hi, Tim. Milana Kołodziejczyk, Primary School number 94 in Warsaw. My question is the career of an astronaut your passion? What other passion do you have?
Well, it's great to be speaking to you in Warsaw this afternoon. And yes, I mean, being an astronaut is certainly has been a passion of mine since a very early age. And that's when my interest in space began, really, as a young boy. But as a teenager, I became very interested and very passionate about flying. And I think really that stemmed from an involvement in a cadet force at school, where I was able to fly light aircraft from the age of kind of 14 and 15 onwards. And I decided I wanted to be a pilot, and I was just very fortunate I was able to fulfill that dream. And by the age of 20, I was a military pilot and had a wonderful career that led to me being a test pilot. And I see being an astronaut really as the pinnacle of a test pilot's career. So for me, it was more of a logical progression throughout my life. And I was very fortunate that that resulted in being in the right time and the right place. I had the correct qualifications, and I was able to apply for the European Space Agency astronaut selection in 2008. So really, it was just a culmination of all of those years that began with a passion for flying and aviation.
Hello, Tim. Wanda Zaha, the Autonomic Middle School of Sopot, and I wanted to ask you which results from an experiment on the ISS have proven to be the most surprising to you, and what skills do you use when conducting this experiment?
Great question. So in terms of the results of the experiments, a lot of the experiments that we do run for a number of years because they have a small sample rate. And so in order to have enough samples to make them viable, they have to run for a number of years. So we don't often get instant gratification in terms of the results of scientific experiments. Often we have to wait for a long time. But I've certainly enjoyed a lot of the human physiology experiments I've been doing up here, actually seeing physical changes in my own body in terms of things like blood pressure, ultrasounds and ocular vision testing, etc. And also doing some of the flame combustion techniques, those experiments which are very visual. And certainly watching flame combustion in zero gravity is incredibly visual and very exciting. I really enjoyed the airway monitoring experiment, where we used the International Space Station's airlock as a hyperbaric chamber for the first time ever. And that will hopefully be an experiment that will continue for a number of years to investigate airway inflammation and will have huge benefits for people on Earth, for example, those people who suffer from asthma. So that's just an example of some of the experiments we've been doing. And in terms of the skills that we need to perform them, well, obviously we're very interested and we're passionate about what we're doing up here, and in particular the science. We need to be able to be very accurate in our work. It's important that we don't lose any scientific data. Obviously, it's an expensive and it's a long process in getting scientific payloads into space. So by the time it comes down to the astronauts, we need to make sure that we work quickly and effectively and efficiently, but most importantly, that we're very accurate in what we're doing.
And now we go to Oslo, Norway, for their two questions.
Hi, Tim. I'm Wenche Hjelmaas Lindahl, teaching at Bjørklangen School. Can you remember the first time you had an interest in space, and how did this influence on your career?
Well, good afternoon, Norway. And what a great question. The first time that really space had an influence on me, I think, was as a very young boy when I used to love looking up at the stars. And I always had kind of questions to my parents about where we are, what's the universe made of, what are the planets in the solar system. And I loved just learning about the stars and the universe. And really that progressed throughout my life into a passion for physics, and as an adult I love studying things like quantum physics, and I still ask those big questions about our place in the universe and how science can help to answer those questions.
Hi Tim, I'm Simon Bergvik from Andenes School, Norway. If you had the opportunity to start your education again, would you have done anything differently? Why or why not?
What a great question. Would I do anything differently? I would say absolutely no. I wouldn't do anything differently because I'm stood here or floating here talking to you from the International Space Station. So I'm exceptionally happy, obviously, in the way that my career has worked out. But it certainly was a fairly unorthodox route to becoming an astronaut. If you were to say to somebody, do you think leaving school at the age of 19 with 3 very average A-levels and not going to university but joining the army was a good route to becoming an astronaut? Perhaps the answer would be no. I was very fortunate that for me that meant I had a huge amount of operational experience in the early part of my career, and I was very fortunate that I was able to do a degree later in life. But I didn't achieve that until the age of 33. Where effectively I had to go back to school, relearn maths to a very high level, and then complete a degree in flight dynamics. So yes, it was a fairly unorthodox route to becoming an astronaut, but it worked out very well for me.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. This is Melanie and ESTEC. I've just heard we have no more time for questions, so we'd like to thank you for your time and give you a chance to say goodbye to the UK, Poland, and Norway.
Well, to everybody that is there today, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for the brilliant questions, and I wish you all a great day from up here on the International Space Station. Bye-bye.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the European Space Agency portion of the event. Please stand by for a voice check from Associated Press.
Station, this is the Associated Press. How do you hear me?
We hear you loud and clear from the International Space Station.
Well, good day, gentlemen, from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. This is Marcia Dunn of the AP speaking to you this morning. Thank you all for participating. It's been an exciting past couple of weeks for commercial space. Let's start with last Friday's successful landing of the Falcon first stage off the coast of Florida. I'm sure you've seen some pictures and video. How do you see this as shaping the future of space flight, bringing back rockets and reusing them?
You know, anytime we can make space flight more efficient and less costly, then it's a huge step forward. And I think, you know, both companies that have achieved this amazing event to be able to land a stage of a rocket like that so that it can be reused, like Blue Origin and SpaceX, is an amazing event. You know, to me, it reminds me of science fiction movies when we were a kid, when all rockets landed like that. And so it's really neat to see. But from a very practical standpoint and for our future, it demonstrates that the commercial space industry is alive and well and being very productive and progressive in terms of the techniques that they plan to use in the future.
Tell me, were you watching the launch and the landing live on Friday evening, or were you sleeping?
No, we were not watching it, Marcia. It didn't work out with our schedule, so we saw the coverage, of course, afterwards. We heard about it as soon as we got up, but no, we did not see it live.
Well, you know, there's also the Bigelow expandable module that you've got up there right now, and if we could talk for that for a few minutes. How excited are you about getting the first inflatable module for astronauts and getting to try it out? Granted, not for another month or so, but tell me your thoughts on expandable, inflatable compartments for space.
Well, we're excited to attach another vehicle essentially onto Space Station. And again, this is an example of where the commercial space industry has really been innovative in their techniques. And so this will be a great way for us to test out both the thermal characteristics of this new type of module and its radiation protection. So it's going to be a neat thing to have on station. We're not going to use it routinely, but we'll go in to add sensors and to make sure everything is working properly.
What kind of a role are you going to play in the next couple of days as it's detached from the trunk of the Dragon and put on board? You going to just monitor that, oversee it, or will you have an active role?
Mostly we'll be monitoring it in terms of the robotic activity. As you know, over the years, we started out in the beginning where the crew on board did all the robotic activity, and then we started developing the ability for the ground to do it, and now they're doing virtually everything with just a couple exceptions like the track and capture of the vehicles that you saw the last couple of weeks. They will move it over with the robotic arm, and then we will grab it with the latches on the berthing mechanism, and then do the initial bolting, and then the ground will take over after that. Of course, we'll do leak checks later on before we ingress it and instrument it, as Tim mentioned.
Well, Robert Bigelow said just the other day that he'd like his first super big inflatable, the B-330, to link up with the International Space Station in 2020. What do you think about that? Might that be a good test bed for the future?
I think anytime we can bring up new modules to space station, we're going to be excited about that. We have a big station here, but there's room to make it bigger. And so if we could add, additional modules to test out the future of space exploration and the way that humans are going to interact and work with modules, I think it's a great idea.
Back to the Dragon. What special treats did you guys find in the latest delivery? Any surprises or something that hit the taste buds just right?
Well, one of the things that the crew love about visiting vehicles is that we get a few fresh supplies, and certainly Dragon was no exception to that. We had some fresh fruit, some oranges, some apples on board, and some personal items as well. So that's some of the nice things that come up in the cargo vehicles.
For the two Tims, you've been up there a while, and Scott Kelly, being back on Earth now from his one-year mission, has mentioned the psychological stress that he had to endure for a year in space. Granted, you're only up there for 6 months, but that's still a long time. What's your take so far on psychological stress on long-duration space flight as it applies to you?
It's a great question, and it was really a pleasure to be here with Scott for his last few months, and it's evident to us that Scott had developed this ability to just endure up here from all the stresses and strains, and really had this nice steady approach. And so really I think that we can learn from him in terms of what's necessary in order to sustain for a long period of time. There are stresses and strains up here. We have a very busy schedule, and we work and live in the same place. So it's not really that you can escape your work and sort of detach away from what you're doing every day. But at the same time, I think that you can learn to develop a pace where it's very easy to work and live up here. And the other thing that's very vital is to have the right kind of people. So when you have a great crew like we do and like we had when Scott was here, it makes life that much better. And I think you can sustain as long as you need to, as long as we can break the code on some of the physiological aspects of zero gravity.
For Tim Peake, I'm wondering how the carbo loading's going up there and the training. The London Marathon's just another week and a half away. Tell me how you anticipate doing, how are you feeling, and how many marathons have you run before?
Yes, I'm really looking forward to this. It's a great challenge that I've set myself, and I'm quite glad that this is happening later on in the mission. So I've had plenty of time now to get used to the T2 treadmill. And one of the biggest challenges is the harness system. Obviously, my body weight has to be kept firmly attached to the treadmill by this harness, and that can rub on the shoulders and around the waist. But I've got the harness fitting pretty well now. I'm very used to running. I've done a few half marathons and a little bit longer, and I really enjoy running up here, and so I'm looking forward to the event next Sunday.
Well, will this be your first marathon on Earth or in space, or have you run some on Earth before?
I actually ran the London Marathon in 1999, and I did it in about 3 hours and 15 minutes. So I'm not going to beat that time, I'm sure, up here. But I'd like to do it in under 4 hours if I'm feeling really good, maybe 3 hours 30, 3 hours 45.
Well, that sounds good enough to get you to Boston next year. Wouldn't that be something? For the other two astronauts, could you tell me, how are you going to be monitoring him? Are you going to be bringing him water or wiping his brow? What's the plan?
Well, it depends upon the schedule when he's actually running it. But no, we'll help him out with whatever he needs. We'll check in on him every now and then and make sure he gets all the food and drink that he needs to make it through it.
Jeff, you're going to be breaking the U.S. record for most cumulative time spent in space, I guess, this fall. How is it for you being back in space? And does it seem like you're going to have spent so much time in space by the end of this mission. It's a long way, even though it's split over several flights. And if that's my last question, I'll say Godspeed to you right now, all three of you.
Thank you. I don't really think too much about that. I think of it more in terms of the accomplishment of the International Space Station. As you know, the first time I got here, it was right at the beginning before Expedition 1, and then came back halfway through the build, and then I was here at almost assembly complete, and now we're in full utilization mode. So it's been an honor to be part of the space station program in that respect. The number of days, I don't really think too much about.
Well, thank you again, all three of you. Safe travels and great success in space.
Thank you so much, Marcia. It's been nice chatting with you.
Station, this is Houston ACR. Thank you. That concludes the event.